All right, we're pleased to be joined this time by Coach Jake Timmerman, one of the best O-line coaches in Georgia here with us. Coach, been the offensive line coach at Grayson, does a great job, and really excited to have you. So, Coach, take it away, man. Appreciate you being on.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me. I always enjoy doing stuff for you guys. So I figured, with where we're at right now, in the off season, being obviously in the very early parts of the off season, right here in late December, I'd talk a little bit about some of the things we do in the off season as far as trying to develop our offensive line athletes, and arguably what you do in the off season is just as maybe if not more important than what you do during the season. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, kind of how we build our guys from the ground up, kind of look at the process, in the different months here in the off season. Then I'll kind of go through some different things, some different exercises as we go through. And then talk just a little bit about our philosophy behind everything. Okay, so just a little bit about me real quick. So my name is Jake Timmerman. I started coaching at Northside High School in 2014, was there for 5 years, fortunate to be on some pretty good teams there. I came to Grayson in 2019 with Coach Carter. We've had some pretty good years here. I won the state championship in 2020. Some guys that have influenced me, and if you know some of these guys, you'll probably know some of the similar language, especially with LaCharles and the stuff he's done at OLP over the last few years. Alex Gibbs, Coach Pittman, formerly at Georgia, now at Arkansas, Herb Hand, okay, and just plenty of other guys that have made an impact on me. So the main thing, just kind of as we get into it right here, is just sort of our general philosophy and our principles. And the first thing that I put on here is be process oriented. I think that's the biggest thing, when you're making a plan for the off season, whether that's for your offensive line training, whether that's for your speed training, whether that's for your install of your scheme, whatever it may be, but to be process oriented. I think, a lot of the problems that guys sometimes have when they're doing stuff in the off season is they just, do stuff. And that may come from, maybe a lack of knowledge, maybe come from whatever, but to be process oriented. And hopefully when we get through with this thing, you'll see that we have a process behind what we're doing. I mentioned earlier, but we focus on building from the ground up. We put a huge emphasis on ankles, knees, hips, all that stuff, to really be making sure that we're rooted in the ground, because that's where you derive all your power from is force through the ground. And that's what we really focus on. Mobility and flexibility, like I mentioned, hips, knees, ankles, offensive linemen, especially nowadays, you can't just be these big, immobile, bodies that can't do much. We want to be athletes, right? We want to be mobile. We want to be flexible, and be athletic in the space that we're in. Our core links everything together. So we put a huge focus on isometric and rotational and anti-rotational emphasis. And so, we're not doing a lot of sit-ups or crunches or stuff like that. We're doing some very specific things in our core to help us with the types of strains that we're going to have as offensive linemen. We're going to have an emphasis on unilateral exercises or single leg exercises, because very, very rarely as an offensive lineman are you driving off both feet at the same time. A lot of times it's one foot after the next. And so we put a big emphasis on unilateral or single leg exercises. And the big thing that we do is we try to teach movement from a biomechanics standpoint before moving on to football specific movements. The first thing we want to be able to do is just move in general. Before we worry about football type of things, right? So before I worry about teaching a kid how to pull and kick out on counter or reach a 3 technique on wide zone, we're just going to worry about moving in general. And you'll see that'll come from a few different things that we do. So just being able to move in general before we worry about the football stuff. So again, just kind of continuing on with some of the things that this is sort of what we go into the process with in mind, what we want to be able to do once we get to the actual football stuff. Again, this probably seems familiar to a lot of people if you know any of LaCharles Bentley stuff, but We want to be able to work on 8 different angles. You can see the diagram over there to the right, forward, backward, left, right, and kind of that gray area in between. Is it exactly always 8 specific angles? No, but you get the general idea, right? We want to be able to have a 345-degree angle stance, okay? Force through the ground is how we generate power. It's how we move effectively as offensive linemen. And with that, teach the drive catch principle. And then we get into the pressure to pressure phase. And that's kind of the more football specific stuff, which I can talk a little bit about at the end, but this is kind of more on the pre-football phase of things. So what's the schedule look like as far as the off season? Well, in the month of January, we don't do anything. Obviously our goal at a place like Grayson is to be playing, past Thanksgiving, playing into December. We've been fortunate to do that for a couple of years that I've been here. But during the month of January, we don't do anything. I'm a big believer that, the kids need to just go and be kids. They grind enough already. And even for me, I need some time to recharge. And, January is big clinic season. So it's a good chance for everybody to kind of get away, rest your body a little bit, things like that. So we really pick up in February. And that's when we focus on building a foundation, right? That's kind of when we get into things like ankle stiffness, hip mobility, adductor strength, our unilateral movements and core strength that I mentioned earlier. And the big question that we want to answer in the month of February is, can I move my own body? Right? If I'm not able to move my own body effectively, how do I have a chance of moving another human body who is more than likely working against me, right, on a football play? So that's our big focus. And I'm sure, a lot of us have those, especially those younger kids. It's a lot of times your freshman and sophomore kids who maybe, grew a lot, maybe have a little extra weight on them. And so our focus, especially for those types of kids, is just getting them to be able to move their own body before we worry about anything football specific. March is when we get into stance and posture maintenance. I'll spend a good month just working on a good stance because if you start to get into spring football and summer and stuff like that, and definitely by the time you get to the regular season, if they don't have a good stance, you're definitely not going to fix it then. You just don't have time to do it. So we spend a good portion of the month of March working on the stance and being able to maintain that stance, what we call posture maintenance, right? And then April is when we get into the football specific stuff, right? So we don't do a ton of football specific stuff. That comes in spring football and summer football and then regular football season. So they're going to get plenty of football training. The stuff we do in the off season here is really about building that foundation for moving forward. So how do I marry this with weight training, right? Hopefully, you're fortunate enough to be at a place where you have have your kids in a dedicated weight training class. And so you don't want to, do stuff in the afternoons or with your O-line trainer, whenever your sessions are that, mess up with or just kind of repeat the stuff they did in weight training periods. And so kind of how I've structured mine is we'll go 4 days a week. 4 days a week. And obviously, the kids can come, we kind of work out who comes when for 4-on-1s and stuff like that. In our last couple of years, I've been really fortunate to work with Coach Nate Mathis, who does an awesome job in our weight room. He's incredibly knowledgeable about this kind of stuff. And so me and him, have sat down and basically kind of planned out, okay, here's the stuff I want to accomplish with the offensive linemen in our after school training sessions in the off season. How can I marry that up with what we're going to do in the weight room? And so obviously it's kind of a general outline, but for example, this is just sort of how it may follow a regular week, right? So in the weight room on Mondays, right, the focus is going to be primarily on power, high intensity, low volume, some linear speed work. And so I'll take the O-line after school for our 4-on-1s, and our focus will be things like hip mobility, right? Unilateral plyometrics and some light Olympic work. Again, I'm not trying to kill them or make this, a who can grind the hardest session after school, right? They're already getting plenty of their solid work in during weight training class. These sessions and our focus with our offensive line training is to focus and fine tune these specific things that'll be needed for offensive line play. So, the next day, Tuesday, that's an upper lower day, medium intensity, high volume, change of direction conditioning. And so for us, our focus after school would be like hip hinge. Okay. I'll kind of get into this a little bit later, but hip hinge is, doing a proper hip hinge is one of the hardest things for kids to learn. And we'll do some ankle work, right? And then Wednesday, it's active recovery day in the weight room. O-line focus will basically be the same so Monday and Wednesday are pretty much the same focus, right? Hip mobility, unilateral plyometrics, and some Olympic work. We just kind of change up the exercises, and I'll list plenty of the exercises that we do. Thursday, in the weight room, Olympic technique, RFD, low percentage, high effort, low volume, change of direction, speed work. And then for our Thursday afternoon session for O-line, it will be the same as Tuesday, right? Hip hinge and ankle work. But again, we'll just change up the exercises to keep things fresh, right? And then Friday, upper, lower, high intensity, low volume in the weight room. Nothing for us on Fridays, right? I don't want to hold the kids after school on Friday. I let them get out of there. So it's 4 days a week for us. It's essentially 2 training days with two primary focuses, and then we just kind of change the exercises up, right? So one of the things that I put an emphasis on this past year, a lot of people get caught up talking ankle mobility. But when you look at a lot of the research that's come out in the last few years, really you want to be focusing on ankle stiffness. When you start looking at the amount of force that goes through an ankle, right? When you strike the ground, in a sprint, or if you're driving off the ball as an offensive lineman, you really want to have stiff ankles. I know that sounds counterproductive, but what we begin to see is that if you have weak ankles, essentially, then there's such an incredible amount of force being produced when you strike the ground in that sprint or that offensive line, like I said, coming off the ball, that if you've got weak ankles, that force is going to basically move up into the knee. And so that's where you might start to see some knee injuries, right? And then so on and so forth. You can move up into the hips. So me and Coach Mathis sat down and talked about some ankle stiffness stuff. I researched a guy named Cal Dietz who does what's called a spring ankle progression. So this is all part of building ankle stiffness. And so we'll do some resistance band ankle work, right? We're working on having stiff ankles. We'll do what are called catchers, which is basically kind of, it's almost like you're in a catcher position, right? But you're holding on to something, right? Whether that's like a rack in the weight room or whatever. You're in kind of this catcher position, but you're up on your toes and you're basically trying to fully extend your ankles, right? And kind of get that straight ankle. We'll do a walking circuit, okay, where you go on your outside part of your foot, the inside part of your foot, and on your toes and on your heels. And it's just basically walking forward and backwards for, maybe 10 yards. And we'll change those up, right? We won't necessarily do all 4 of those every day. But on a day we do ankle stiffness, for example, we may do some of the Cal Dietz spring ankle progression. We may do some toe walks, and then maybe something like can-cans, right? Can-cans, basically, the kicking up and on over. And that's, again, really focusing on keeping that stiff ankle as their toes, or as the balls, their feet strike the ground, right? And not bending the ankle. So that's a big thing, kind of put an emphasis on this last year after some research that, we've been seeing about like knee injuries and hip injuries and stuff like that. So I would encourage people to look into the Cal Dietz ankle stuff. Hip mobility, that's stuff that a lot of people are probably more familiar with. Whether it's knee flops or fire hydrants, deep squat holds, butt walks, overhead duck walks. The overhead duck walks are a pretty solid staple in our training. Just taking a PVC pipe, basically dropping down as low as you can go, and really trying to open up those hips. Goblet and overhead squats are great for beginners. If you've got those young guys that have those really stiff hips, the goblet squats and the overhead squats are great for those young guys. Whether that's an overhead squat, even if it's just holding a PVC pipe. But overhead squats are great just for building hip mobility and just building squat technique in general, really. And over-unders. We do a lot of over-unders with hurdles and things of that sort. Basically just, driving the knee up over one that's that kind of low, and then, going down and under and through one that's a little bit higher. So we do probably the overhead duck walks and the over-unders. And the fire hydrants are probably the ones we do the most. But again, I think the goblet and the overhead squats are great for beginners. So the hip hinge, right? I mentioned this a little earlier. One of the toughest things to especially for young kids, but one of the toughest things to get kids to do really well, not to just be able to do it in general, but to really do a good, solid hip hinge. And we want to have good hip hinge. That's one of the things I say to my players all the time, during the season: hip hinge, hip hinge, hip hinge, right? I don't really, talk much about like getting your pads low, because for me, it's kind of more about their, their hips and stuff like that than getting their shoulder pads low. That's another discussion for another time. But we don't want to play straight up, obviously. We want to keep our head, neck, and spine in a neutral position. And when you're working these hip hinges, right, you kind of want to, talk to the kids about that neutral spine. A great way to emphasize that is to basically take a PVC pipe and have them basically hold it with one hand over their head and one hand kind of around where their tailbone is. And it's running down their back. And essentially, if they have a good neutral neck and spine, the PVC pipe should contact basically right at the lower back, right between the shoulder blades and the back of the skull, to have that good neutral spine. You want to talk to them about pushing their butt back. All right. It's not a squat, right? We're not just dropping our butt. We want to really focus on pushing the butt back. You should feel it in the glutes and the upper hamstrings, not the quads, right? So that's some feedback you can give to your kids. If they're feeling in the quads, right, then they need to push that butt back. Okay. Need to push that butt back so they really feel it in their glutes and their upper hamstrings. You don't want to let your knees come too far forward over the toes, and you don't want to lock your knees out either. A great coaching point for this is to just have them stand, after you watch them do it, try to do a hip hinge a couple of times, look at them and see, are their knees and shins going forward or backwards, right? And if, for example, if they're going forward too far, put them in front of a bench. Okay, put their shins about an inch or two away from the bench, and then have them do the hip hinge there, right? Because now that bench serves as basically a barrier saying, hey, you don't want to have your knees or your shins come so far forward. And then you can do the same thing for behind them, right? If they're kind of like locking out their knees real bad, right? Stuff like that. So kind of making them do it in front of something like a bench right there is a great sort of tangible feedback for them. So we'll do barbell hip thrusters are great just for kind of building strength in the hips. Kettlebell swings are great just for that general movement. Kettlebell swings are great for like just about anything you want to do ever. We'll do some barbell good mornings. Obviously, we'll start with very lightweight and then work our way up from there. Nordic hip hinge is something that was really good this year. If you don't know what a Nordic hip hinge is, essentially you kind of get into the same position you would do like a glute ham raise, but you don't go all the way out like you would like a glute ham raise. You essentially hip hinge from that position, right? Your hands are crossed over your chest, and essentially the further out you lean your hips, the harder it is, right? So obviously for your beginner type guys, you would, have them, sort of sit their hips back a little bit and just work on the hip hinge from that position. And then as they get better at it, now they can kind of start to increase that angle a little bit. And then resistance band hip extension, right? Basically taking a resistance band, hooking it up to something, anchor it down, taking the band between your legs then, and working on your hip extension and hip hinge with that resistance band, still trying to keep that good posture. Like I said, with the neutral spine is huge. The big thing that a lot of them are going to want to do is maybe like hunch, roll over their spine or duck their head. And those are the big things we want to avoid, right? Because especially in offensive line play, we don't want kids ducking their head. We don't want them, rolling their shoulders. We want to have that nice, solid posture that we talk about all the time. So adductors, these are a huge part of offensive line play. This is what allows us to keep our knees inside our ankles. If you are not playing with your knees inside your ankles as offensive linemen, then you are probably not generating a lot of power, and you are probably not able to change direction very well. So it's hugely important that we have strong adductors. And just because of the nature of high school weight training, most of the time, a high school weight training program is not going to put a huge focus on training adductors for understandable reasons. And so we make it a huge part of our training sessions after school. So like I said, your adductors, right? That's what allows you to be able to basically squeeze your knees, right? To keep your knees inside your ankles. And so we'll start with some very simple exercises, like a prone isometric squeeze. Basically, the athlete is laying on their back, and you take something very light, like maybe even like a soccer ball, put it between their ankles, and then also between their knees, not at the same time, right? But basically, they have to squeeze their adductors, engage their adductors to squeeze the soccer ball and hold it off the ground, right? That's kind of like the old leg lifts, right, that we used to do in PE. But you're now using your adductors to hold the soccer ball between your ankles or between your knees. As they get better at that, then you can basically, increase the weight a little bit, right? Maybe go from a soccer ball to a 6-pound med ball, 12-pound med ball, so on and so forth, right? Swinging leg with tension bands, right, or resistance bands, basically, just putting one leg through a resistance band and swinging it across the body, right? Med ball hold walks. This is another one that we do a lot. Essentially, you're going to take a medicine ball. I use I think the brand is J-Fit. J-Fit, 6 to 10 pound med balls. We don't really use any of the real heavy ones, but 6 to 10 pound med balls. You'll take the med ball. You will basically, the athlete will put it between their thighs, right? You want to have the ball right under the groin, no space there. They'll be in a little bit of an athletic posture, and they will essentially walk very, small steps, right? These would not be your normal walking gait, but be very small steps, squeezing and engaging the adductors the entire time as they're walking. And we'll do that for, again, about 5 to 10 yards. We'll go forward, we'll go backwards, we'll go left, we'll go right. And this is one of the things that the kids will look at and go, oh, that looks really easy, until they try to do it and realize that it is not as easy as it looks, especially if they don't have very strong adductors. But we do that one a lot. Once we get into more of the football stuff and working on our stance and stuff, I'll basically have them get in a stance. We'll take resistance bands and we'll wrap them around the inside of their leg, slightly above the knee, and we'll pull. I'll put them in right hand stance, left hand stance. We'll pull on the inside leg, the outside leg. We'll do both at the same time to really make sure that they are not allowing their knees to be pulled out, right? They're engaging those adductors. And lateral lunge slides are another really good one too. Basically, like, if you're in the gym or something like that, take your foot and put it on like a shirt or something on one foot, and you're sliding that foot out as far as you can and then pulling that foot back to you. Those are harder than they look as well. But the adductors are a big focus for us. Olympic lifts and some upper body stuff. Don't do a ton of this because they do get a lot of this in their core weight training class, but we do like to touch on some stuff, especially the single arm stuff to build some shoulder strength. But the Olympic lifts, I think, are important because it teaches the athletes how to create force, but also to absorb or catch the force, which again, kind of going back to the drive catch stuff we teach is very important. But there's so many times as offensive linemen where you've got to be able to absorb force properly, and not just crumple anytime that you have someone else's force thrust upon you, right? So single arm dumbbell snatch, push press, split jerk, bench. We do a lot of single arm dumbbell bench. Just again, kind of. We also have to think too, in the sense that sometimes we have to train in a not perfect posture. And so, one of the things that offensive linemen can get hurt by is when they let their elbows get too far away from their rib cage, and now they absorb some force or something like that, and boom, now there's extra strain placed on that pec shoulder area. And so we'll do some single arm dumbbell bench where our elbows are away from our rib cage, which again, in the heat of the moment is not ideal, but it happens. And so we'll do some of that just to kind of build up that pec shoulder area, for when those things do happen. Our core training, again, we're not doing a lot of the sit-ups and crunches and stuff. Our main emphasis is going to be on isometric and rotational and anti-rotational, I should say. So that's going to be any type of plank variation you can think of, from just the standard plank. And these are ones, especially with your big guys, you kind of have to build up a little bit, right? We'll start off doing 30 seconds of a plank, right? And then work our way up to a minute or a minute and a half, all kind of different variations, right? Whether it's, on the side. I really like the side plank where you put the top foot on like a bench or something and have to hold yourself up, because now you're working isometric core and you're getting some adductor work. So those are great. Dead bug variations are good too. I always love the dead bugs because they're another one that the kids will say, "Oh, those look super easy. I could do those." I'll rag on Walt for a second here. He's one of our offensive linemen. But when the first training session I had with Walt back when he was a freshman during the COVID season, we were doing some dead bugs, and he was just talking about, "Oh, I can do those, coach. Those are no problem." And he got to about 15 and was breathing heavy. So dead bugs are great. Really focused on making sure that the kids are doing them properly, right? Really trying to press the belly button through the floor. Bird dogs are another good one. Pal-off press. I love a pal-off press. These are great for anti-rotational stuff. You can do just a standard, pal-off position, where you're not even actually doing the press. You can just hold it. And then also you can work a lunge ISO position, which again is great for some unilateral stuff. Kind of getting a 2-for-1 there. Suitcase holds are another great one. Basically, a suitcase hold is you are basically holding a weight in one hand and nothing in the other. And so obviously the objective is to not let the weight pull you down on one side, but then also to not overcompensate on the other, right? To be able to maintain those shoulders, maintain that posture while you've got weight pulling down on just one side. You can do those regular or walking, kind of like a single arm farmer's walk, I guess. But so we'll do those. We would do those with like the heavy dumbbells, right? And kind of walk with those. Rotational med ball throws are great. This is when I would like to use like heavy slam balls, like the 20-30 pound slam balls. Basically rotating and throwing those, maybe up against a wall, or just, getting a partner, get about 10 yards apart and just throw into each other. But that's when I would like to use the heavier medicine balls or slam balls, is for those rotational throws. And then we get into the unilateral training, single leg training, and there's a ton of stuff you can do for single leg stuff. Two really good ones that I like that I like to use to lead us off with in a training session are lunge iso holds and lunge iso pumps. Basically, you are getting in that lunge position with one knee on the ground. And a hold would basically be you're going to now pick yourself up off the ground about 6 inches, and you're going to hold that position for maybe 7 to 8 seconds, and that's one rep. And then a pump would be where you're going to just basically, obviously, constantly go up and down. Those are great for starting a session to really prime the legs and get them going. So we'll do, like, for example, maybe do 3 sets of 8 in each leg of lunge iso pumps, and then maybe like 3 sets of 5 or 6 in the lunge iso holds to start us off with a session. Lunges are great, forwards, backwards. You can do compass lunges, where you're going in all 8 directions or however many you want to go. That gets them kind of working across their body too, which is always good. Single leg bounds, a great thing to do with the single leg bounds, kind of once they've got the feel of it, is to give them one of those lighter medicine balls and have them do the bounds, right? The lateral bounds, holding the medicine ball. And the objective is for them to not let the medicine ball, go outside of their frame. So now you're getting some unilateral training while also stealing some isometric core work, right? Because they're using their core to keep the med ball within their frame. So that's another good one. Single leg step ups are obviously great. There's a billion varieties you can do of those. You can do stuff with weight overhead. You can do a suitcase hold, again, where you're just holding weight in one hand, making sure the shoulder stays square. You can do holding a medicine ball. Lateral crossover step ups are great. I kind of mentioned this earlier, but you want to do some stuff where your athletes cross over on the side of their body, right? So a lateral crossover step up will be you're sort of standing perpendicular to the box, right? You're not facing the box. You're standing kind of side by side it. And you take, for example, your left leg and you'll cross over your right leg and put your left foot on the box, and then you'll step up and kind of repeat that process. Those are really good. Single leg stand-ups, these are great for beginners. If, like I said, kind of I mentioned earlier, if you've got those bigger young guys that do, have some trouble moving, just have them do single leg stand-ups until they build up some of that unilateral strength. Sit them down in a chair or in a high box or whatever they're able to do, but literally just have them put one foot on the ground and work on standing up on that one foot, right? Not jumping up in the air or trying to, lift themselves up in the air by like throwing their arms up in the air, but like literally just have them stand up on one leg. And like I said, you may need to adjust the height of whatever it is they're sitting on. But those are great for young guys who are bigger bodied and still haven't mastered their own body yet. Single leg box jumps are great. Front, lateral are good. If you have some athletes who maybe can't do a box jump, find something they can jump over, even if it's just maybe, a line you drew in the sand or something, right? But have them trying to get off the ground on those single leg jumps. All right. Step offs, these are good for absorbing force, right? We kind of mentioned that earlier. It's great that we are able to generate force, but we also need to be able to absorb or catch the force as well. So like, for example, have them stand on a high box or a smaller box if they need it. And they'll just step off the box and they'll land on one foot and come to a balance on one foot, and then they move. Right, and then they go on to something. You can add stuff after that, like a jump or a lunge or whatever. But initially, we literally just work on them stepping off the box, absorbing the force on one foot, and then moving on. Right, and we'll do those like stepping off the front of the box. We'll do it stepping off to the side, and then pistol squats are another good single leg exercise. You can use a high box or a low box, based on your athlete's needs. TRX straps are also great for this. You can hook those up to your rack for maybe some of your athletes who cannot do a full single leg pistol squat. And so the TRX straps give them some assistance until they are able to master that movement. Okay. So that's kind of the foundation, right? But that's the stuff we focus on before we get anywhere near doing football stuff. And then kind of once we've spent all of the month of February and getting into the month of March, then we'll start to talk about getting in a football stance. And even throughout the entire month of March and April, we're still doing those things I mentioned earlier. We just may scale it back a little bit to only do it for 20, 25 minutes instead of for an hour, right? So we can take the rest of that time to work on things like stance or whatever, or maybe our football specific type of workouts for that day are going to be for 4-on-1s. But just to talk about stance a little bit, when we teach the stance, we talk about finding stability and width and strength in their stagger. Not every athlete is going to have the same stance, right? So the whole, put your feet shoulder width apart and go heel to toe doesn't work for everybody. You're going to have, especially in high school football, you're probably going to have that 5'10" O lineman. You're probably going to have that 6'5" offensive lineman. They're not going to have the same stance. Their feet are not going to be in the same place, right? We give them some parameters to work in, but then they find where they're comfortable at within those parameters. We want to have 50-50 weight distribution. I'm not a big, 60, 40, 70, 30. I don't know what that feels like. I mean, I know what it's like to have more than, more weight on one foot than the other, but I don't know exactly what 70% or 60% is. So we really focus on 50-50 weight distribution to also obviously be able to go in either direction, right? We're going to turn our outside toe slightly out so we can press through the midfoot. We do what's called closing the door, which basically means we're going to get our hips back square to the line of scrimmage, because for a lot of your athletes, when they turn that toe out, their hips are going to follow, right? So we get our hips back square to the line of scrimmage. We're going to squeeze the adductors, like I mentioned earlier. You're going to have your knees inside your ankles, your outside leg, which is always going to be your drop. Your drop leg is going to basically function as a kickstand. It's kind of another LaCharles Bentley phrase. Then we go through our hip hinge process, right, that we worked on for the whole month of February and getting into the month of March, right? We're going to lock the elbows. We're going to slide the hands down to our wrist over our kneecaps. And that's kind of the ideal position we want to be in. Roll the shoulders, squeeze the scaps. And ideally, we should be in a great offensive line stance from that posture, right? From that setup. And we'd go through and we do this setup over and over and over again, from a right-hand side to a left-hand side. I'm not big on switching offensive linemen during the season. I don't like to do that. But during the off season, I cross-train the guys all the time. And then we'll get into drive catch, right? That's something that, more people can kind of learn about through the trials and stuff. I won't talk about it too much right here. But that goes into everything we teach, when it gets time to start working some football specific movements. Is applying force through the ground, pushing the ground away from you, down and away in the opposite direction you're trying to go, and making sure we're pressing through the midfoot, right? This is when we spend a lot of time teaching the catch part of the drive catch as well. You want to think of it like splashing a puddle of water, or basically pounding a nail through the ground, if you will. You want to be on the inside part of your foot. If you are catching on the outside part of your foot, that can lead to rolling over, rolled ankles, not being able to change direction, not being able to absorb the proper amount of force. And usually when we start doing this, we'll talk, from a knee. We'll go from we'll use a med ball or from the ground, and go from there, right? And we'll work different angles. Work cone, maybe like a tight 5, wide 5, things of that sort, right? Front side, back side. And we'll do the same thing for our pass sets as well, okay? But that's kind of everything. Like I said, the main focus for us, especially through the months of February and March, is building that foundation of getting them to be able to move their own bodies and get in a proper stance before we get into the football specific stuff, which they're about to do from May till whenever you're done playing. So that's what I got.
Man, that was awesome. I think, there's a lot of reasons why football's good in Georgia. But one of them is obviously the quality of coaching overall. But I'm specifically going to say the quality of coaching on the offensive line,
No doubt.
I feel like is better. And I'm biased, so I'm sure some people will tell me I'm wrong. But I feel like you included among 20 other guys I could name that are phenomenal offensive line coaches. And that's where, no offense to the other guys, but it's where you can probably make the biggest impact on the team, having a great offensive line coach, because those are guys who will show improvement by being coached, maybe more so than, a really good athlete that's a running back or a defensive back or something that you sometimes can actually paralyze them by coaching them to some degree.
Oh yeah,
And when
I
offensive
totally
lineman,
agree.
that's very difficult to do, being and the year-round part of it, what you guys are doing. It is a piece, and I'm not saying it's the only thing, or it's not, it may be one of 100 things, but it is one of the reasons why football's been so good the last 10 or 15 years in Georgia. The quality of coaching on the offensive line specifically has been much, much improved. And so I think if anybody listened to all that, probably understood about half of it, but they can at least agree to that. The good news about these is it's recorded, so they can pause it, they can Google, or they can email you if they got a question, right? Or text you or something.
And that's, I have had guys ask me to be like, you do all this with your kids, right? You get into all this, and yeah, I do. I use the same verbiage with our kids. I think a lot of people would agree that kids tend to rise to whatever standards
Yeah.
you set for them, and if you use this verbiage and you use it over and over again, and you explain to the kids what these things are they going to go around talking about this stuff all the time? Probably not. But at least when you're in your training session and you say, hey, engage your adductors, they need to know what that means, right? So if you use this verbiage, I think it builds a language between you and your players. And, some people may say that it's over the top and yada, yada, yada. But, I like to think we've had some pretty good success over here. And obviously we've got really good players. So I can't take much of the credit, but I do feel like that, this is something that helps put our players in a position to be successful. And like I mentioned, Coach Mathis earlier, me and Coach Mathis are huge nerds for like the sports performance side of things. So I love this stuff, and I enjoy doing it, and I think our kids enjoy kind of how we've structured things in the off season as well. So yes, we do this stuff. It's not just clinic
Yeah,
talk.
it's not just talk. They do it. I've seen it. And coach, I believe that quarterback and offensive line, probably the only two positions where I believe they are going to rise to your level of intelligence. Like you're going to need to talk to them, and at least at your level in 7A. You got people from single A schools all the way to 7A
Yeah,
listening to this. It might be different, but if you're in Gwinnett County in 7A, you know you're going to have to hold them to a high standard of understanding at those
no doubt.
positions. And not that the other positions aren't important. I don't mean to demean any of the other ones. I'm just saying every position is different. But I do think at quarterback and offensive line, you almost have to talk to them like a coach.
Yeah,
And they usually actually seek that. Most of the good ones anyway.
I
They
would
want.
agree.
So I would agree. And then anything, there's a million ways to skin a cat, but I'll tell you this: the train, getting them to move all year with those movements is very important.
Absolutely.
What you choose to pick from that is up to you. But offensive line is not a natural position. Getting kids to do those movements more, especially now that you can do it with 4-on-1s, and a lot of it can be done in the weight room, like you said. That doesn't even have to be, it doesn't have to be a sport specific thing. If you're not taking advantage of that, you might want to look into that this offseason. I think if nothing else, that'd be my advice based on what I just listened to.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that, and it's funny you say that because I tell our kids all the time, offensive line is maybe the most unnatural position you can play in any sport in the
Right.
world. Like I don't know, especially pass protection.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know of any other sport or position that asks you to do the most unique and specific and like you said, unnatural type of things that offensive line play asks you to do. So like you said, just the more and more we can do that, is important. And if anybody has any questions about any of the things they saw on the PowerPoint or any specific exercises, You can reach out on Twitter. I'll be glad to answer any questions if you have any specific exercises that I mentioned.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you, man. I always appreciate talking to you and looking forward to talking to you again soon.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
Take care, Coach.
Yes, sir. You too.